Morning, good afternoon, good evening. Zimbabwe is a failed state. The consequences of the failed state is that millions are living in abject poverty. There's no shortage of proof that millions are living in abject poverty. Millions of Zimbabweans, ordinary Zimbabweans, still live in the rural areas. And this is what they call home for many of them. You won't find toilets in there, or running water, or electricity. This day and age. And those in the urban centers are not much better off. This is what some of the urban dwellers live in. Ian Smith once said that if blacks rule themselves, they will be walking on sewage and think it normal. He was right. What we can see on that building there is the sewage is overflowing and it's discoloring the whole building. And the whole front of it and the back of it. And in the foreground is the open sewer. How did we get here? I think it is an important question and one which we must find an answer to. Well, one of the reasons we got here is that Zimbabwe has been cursed with having millions of ignorant, naive, and gullible voters. We cannot deny that we have got some incredibly naive and ignorant people out there. And they've been conned to do all manner of things, including participating in flawed elections, which they've been repeatedly warned, these elections are flawed. And if you participate, you give legitimacy to the ruling vote rigging Zanu PF and perpetuating your own suffering. But that has had no effect at all. It is a true tragedy. Right now, we had an election in 2023 in which the opposition leader, Nelson Chamisa, told an idiotic lie that he had plugged all the vote rigging loopholes, that people should participate in those elections, and Triple C was going to win big. It was an idiotic lie because Chamisa had not done any such thing. And what is so disappointing is that there are still many people out there who still don't want to believe that Chamisa lied to them. Something as fundamental and simple as that. What evidence you want to convince you that Chamisa lied? And yet this is where we are. More significantly, Chamisa is exploiting that naivety to con them to participate in 2028 elections and thus perpetuate the Zanu PF dictatorship. So that was the great misfortune for the people of Zimbabwe, having millions of ignorant, naive, gullible, and therefore easily conned voters. They have the vote. We cannot take it away from them now. But the other problem we had, which has made our problem worse, is that we have had the misfortune of having some of the most ruthless, predatory ruling elite. We have exploited the people's ignorance and naivety for their own selfish purpose. Zimbabwe had the great misfortune of having founding fathers who had no vision at all. Indeed, they had no common sense. I've often compared Zimbabwe to our neighbor, South Africa. One thing that can be said about South Africa is that they had visionary leaders, like the late Nelson Mandela. While some people may not appreciate it, the greatest legacy that Nelson Mandela has given the people of South Africa is a democratic, healthy and functioning democratic political system. Yes, South Africa, since 1994, when they gained the end, at the end of the end of apartheid, have had their serious problems, leadership problems. But nonetheless, the country has been able to move on because it had healthy and functioning democratic institutions. An independent judiciary, an independent press, and a political system that allowed free, fair, and credible elections to take place. Something that Zimbabwe has failed to have. Here is a video clip of Nelson Mandela speaking at his trial and pronouncing his vision.
During my lifetime, I have dedicated my life to this struggle of the African people. I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the idea of a democratic and free society in which all persons will live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an idea for which I hope to live for and to see realized.
There is Mandela's vision of what he would want to see in South Africa, of the South Africa that he wanted to see. It's in total contrast to what Robert Mugabe and the Zanu PF intended. For the country's first elections to deliver independence in 1918, Robert Mugabe and his cronies deployed their freedom fighters. They were not all sent to assembly points. Some were left in the field. And their instructions was to tell the electorate that if Zanu PF does not win the elections, the Bush War would continue. What choice did the people have? Of course, they voted to end the Bush War. But in doing so, they also lost forever their right to a meaningful say in the governance of the country. Because 3 years down the line, Mugabe launched the infamous Kukurawundi, whose only purpose was to force the only other political party in the country that constituted a formidable challenge to Zanu PF's hold on power, i.e. PF SAPO, led by the late Dr. Joshua Nkomo, to force them to give up their existence as an independent political party and join Zanu PF. And this was achieved finally in 1987, after over 20,000 people had been murdered in the Kukurawundi massacre. And the signing of the Unity Accord cleared the way for the imposition of the de facto one-party state that has ruled the country to this day. Mugabe and his Zanu PF colleagues, all they wanted was power. And the political influence and wealth that came along with that absolute power. So Mugabe could now afford to build for himself this Gushungo mansion, the blue roof in Harare. Many people believe it costed the nation a cool 3 to 4 billion US dollars to build the mansion. And during Mugabe's rule, corruption was rampant. And so it is no surprise that millions found themselves living in this mud hut while the ruling elite lived in the mansions. And the right for the people to say this is not right was denied, because Zimbabweans, ever since the country's independence, have never had free, fair, and credible elections. to be correct, the country did have the opportunity, many opportunities, in fact, to end the Zanu PF dictatorship. The best of which was during the GNU of 2008 to 2018. What happened then? The opposition MDC leaders were bribed by Robert Mugabe with the trappings of high office, and they failed to implement even one token reform. And since the GNU debacle, the MDC-CCC leaders have participated in flawed elections, knowing fully well that the process is flawed, but participated regardless, out of greed. The people themselves, unfortunately, have been slow to wake up to the reality that our friends have sold out, that the MDC leaders were now Zanu PF Team B in all but name. There is no doubt that the opposition in Zimbabwe has been totally ineffective. Right now, we are looking at 2028, and it is almost certain that they will participate in those flawed elections out of greed. Chamisa and company will con the people to participate in those flawed elections out of greed. They themselves, the opposition, will know, as we all now do, that Zanu PF will rig those elections, and that if the people participate, they will only be giving Zanu PF legitimacy. But Mnangagwa knows that as long as he has got the bribes, their gravy train bait on his fishing rod, the opposition will participate in those flawed elections, giving him legitimacy. So Zimbabwe had the misfortune of having the founding fathers, Mugabe and his friends. We had no vision, none. But also had the misfortune of having the second phase, the opposition, who could have implemented the reforms and put the country back on track, who too have turned out to have no common sense, let alone vision. And this is why Zimbabwe is a failed state. Other countries in the region, I mentioned South Africa, but another one that is doing very well, thank you, is Botswana. You cannot deny that Botswana's founding father, Seretse Khama, was a man of vision. Botswana has been a healthy and functioning democracy ever, ever since he was the first president of that country. We had our chance to do that in 1980. We failed because Mugabe and company were blinded by their greed. And then we had another chance, the golden chance, the best chance so far since independence, during the GNU of 2008 to 2013. But Morgan Tsvangirai and company were easily bribed by Mugabe, and the force forgot about what they had been fighting for, what people had been risking their lives to vote them into power to do. This is the tragedy of Zimbabwe. And having an electorate that is ignorant and gullible has only made our situation worse. At the present moment, the way out is for the people themselves to realize that they cannot count on Zanu PF, Mnangagwa and his cronies. They are never going to reform themselves out of office. And so they will never implement any meaningful reforms to get the country back on a democratic footing. But they've also got to realize that the MDC-CCC opposition leaders have given up on implementing the reforms to ensure free, fair, and credible elections. It's a quantum leap, but one that must be made. Because as long as people continue to have this binary mentality that the choice is between Zanu PF or the opposition, then the country is stuck. Because the opposition is now Zanu PF Team B in all but name. Chamisa and company conned the people in 2018 to participate in flawed elections, knowing fully well that the process is flawed, knowing fully well that by participating, they're only giving Zanu PF legitimacy. They've repeated that in 2018 and then 2023, and they will repeat it in 2028. The people themselves have to wake up to that reality. We have the misfortune of having founding fathers who had no common sense, let alone vision. Even when we were given a second chance, the MDC failed to deliver. Now we have got to tend to our own selves and address our own weakness. I find it amazing that anyone out there would still be denying that Chamisa lied about plugging the vote rigging loopholes. At least the starting point. How can you deny, given all the evidence that is there? He did not plug the vote rigging loopholes. So why are you failing to accept that reality? Because if you accept that reality, you'll be able to see whether or not he's going to lie to you again, to con you to participate in 2028. It is a challenge. Zimbabwe is a failed state, but we can rescue ourselves out of it if we understand what the problem is and what the solution, the options we have before us. We do have a way out. We are not doomed to remain a failed state. We can work our way out of it. But that requires people opening their eyes and seeing, particularly, that the opposition, that they have entrusted the task of implementing the democratic reforms these last 25 years have sold out. They failed to implement even one token reform. That's why Zanu PF is able to rig the elections. The common sense position is accept the opposition have failed and look for other opposition leaders who will implement those reforms. We must think outside the box. The political choice in Zimbabwe today is not between Zanu PF and MDC, Triple C, because that is a false choice. Because MDC Triple C, like I said, that Zanu PF Team B in all but name, playing for Team A to win, for Team A to have legitimacy. The choice before the people of Zimbabwe today is how to end this Zanu PF dictatorship, and that entails rejecting both Zanu PF and their MDC Triple C sidekick. Think about it. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon.